Namaste. Up next is a one-time special that will be a catalytic journey for your mind, body, and spirit. Today we're featuring local yoga instructor Joanna Brooks, who was recently on the cover of M Magazine. Later, join us here in the studio where we'll walk you through several poses with Catherine Ross, an experienced yoga teacher and former registered nurse. Then you'll discover plenty of profound reasons why so many people all over the world are practicing yoga today. So get off that couch and grab a mat because yoga is for everybody, and that means you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm your host, Luis De Leon, and thank you for tuning in to Yoga is for Everybody. During the next half hour, I'll guide you through a diverse philosophy, an effective and practical scientific method, and a stunning art form. On this show, we'll describe yoga's objectives and even try a few poses. But first, we'll discuss the complexity of yoga and introduce you to the 8-limbed path. Next, we'll have Catherine Ross in the studio with some of her longtime devoted students, and Catherine will discuss the science of yoga. We talked with Joanna Brooks, owner of Embody Yoga here in Milwaukee, and she examines yoga's goals and benefits and explores community and diversity in the practice. Catherine will demonstrate how to do a few postures accurately to gain the most benefits. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is yoga and why is it for everybody? Let's begin briefly by examining yogic philosophy. A common misconception is that yoga is designed for only a certain type of person. For instance, people who are extremely flexible. Well, today let's discover that this is not the case. The word yoga comes from the Sanskrit root yuj, to join or unite. Similar verbs come from this root can be defined to yoke or to meditate deeply. Combining these meanings, the word yoga has been interpreted as a way to unite your mind, body, and spirit to your deeper consciousness and the higher powers of the spiritual world. The yoga asanas or postures are only a part of a greater philosophy, the 8-limb path, as written by Patanjali, a legendary figure who lived in around 500 BCE. Patanjali, described as the Yoga Sutras and practice of yoga, is only one of the 8-fold system. First are the yamas, or social practices. There are 5 of these, and they are nonviolence, truth, non-stealing, abstinence, and non-hoarding. The next on the path are 5 niyamas, or personal ethics. These include purity, contentment, discipline, self-study, and the study of the scriptures, and surrender to a higher power. Thirdly, we have the asanas, or the practice of postures. Fourth is pranayama, or breathing exercises. Then it's pratyahara, or controlling of the senses. Sixth is dharana, or concentration. Next is dhyana, or meditation. And finally, the 8-fold on this path is samadhi, or union with the divine. Let's focus on the asanas, or postures, and some of its objectives. Mindfulness is key when practicing yoga, or as Buddhists call it, bare attention. This means to tune yourself to the sensations of your body in which it experiences when practicing yoga. For instance, what muscles are you stretching? Where is there resistance? And where do you feel freer? Just observe your muscles and don't judge what you are feeling. Also, be aware of your breath. Is it shallow or deep? Where are you breathing from? The diaphragm, the lungs? Is your breath smooth or choppy? Use this time when practicing yoga to focus on your breathing as a place for your brain to rest, and eventually you will be able to hold poses for longer periods of time and stretch more deeply. And finally, we discuss the meaning of namaste. Namaste literally means, I bow to you. It is used in yoga at the beginning and the end of a class. When one puts their hands in a prayer position and then puts their hands to their heart, it is signifying the divine spark that flows from the heart, and by performing this gesture, you are letting truth flow and sharing it with others from your heart. After finding out more of what yoga means on a broader spectrum, we can see that this ancient system is intricate and unique. It's also layered like an onion. Practicing the yoga asanas creates vast communities of students and teachers all across the globe. At the same time, it exists as a constructive tool for individual and spiritual growth. We'll be right back. Right now I'm here with Catherine Ross. She owns her own studio called A Center for Yoga. She is a yoga teacher and a former registered nurse. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, well, of course, how about you start with telling us a little bit about yourself and when did you get started with yoga?
I began the study of yoga back in 1968, and that was because of my very good friend Kathleen Hitchcock, who is also in philosophies, where I met her, introduced me to the practice of yoga. And I was very delighted with it, and then began a deeper study with various Eastern teachers. So I've studied with Swami Rama, Swami Vaishyananda, Swami Ban, and Ram Baba. Have spent time with Ramanand Patel and Angela Farmer, as well as BKS Iyengar. And I chose to work with BKS Iyengar because he had the understanding, number one, you are not just a single body. You've got two sides, front and back. And all of yoga posture work is to make sure alignment is and accuracy is inside of the poses. So that's basically why I eventually just completely traveled the journey with BKS Iyengar.
Wow, I mean, that's a big thing, BKS Iyengar. Iyengar yoga.
Yeah.
And so we were talking before the show and you said that India came to you. And so when did you work with BKS Iyengar?
I met him in 1975 is when I first met him. I already had my center. In 1971, I opened up the center in Wauwatosa, and I met a gal who had just recently come back from his ashram. And we were with several of other teachers because we wanted to form a yoga teachers union at the time. And she began to demonstrate his poses, the same positions that I was working with, side triangle and many of the other poses. And I could see the absolute accuracy, the beauty, and really came into the understanding why yoga is an art form. Because if it's done correctly and done with awareness of alignment and accuracy in the position, which means the standing Tadasana, that Tadasana must be present in every posture in yoga. And there's 84 classic positions.
Well, great.
Of yoga.
You know,
so.
I'm still pretty new to yoga, and I'm noticing a common trend now in a lot of younger people really taking advantage of the art form, primarily for meditation, handling stress, especially for college students, you know, and getting all this homework at work and internships and things like that. So many people now are practicing, specifically in this country, where before, virtually non-existent way many years ago.
No, I used to get picketed.
Yeah. And so now what are the benefits that come with this kind of practice?
What comes with this kind of practice, you have to come into an understanding that the reason one should practice yoga is because we have taken an upright position. We are the only living consciousness on the planet Earth that actually would have the courage to expose our heart center, which is most vulnerable to any type of attack or danger, the abdominal centers, and all the way down into the lower body regions. No animal will do this. How long does it take a dog to roll over to show you his belly to you? A very long time of acquaintance. And yet we as humans go forth in this type of positioning, upright position. And because of that, we have a lot of heart disease, and we also have a lot of back problems, especially low back problems. And yoga works with low back, so you don't have to enter that type of experience. And it also works to help you keep a healthy heart throughout the whole of your life.
Right.
And that comes in a lot with knowing how to breathe, which you brought up before with the pranamaya body.
Right.
And the pranic energy. Yeah, so yes, it's very important. And at the same time, it begins to reduce stress. Now, how is this possible? Just a simple answer. If you have ever been a swimmer, when you're on the surface of the water, you've got all the waves and you're bouncing all over and you hear all the noise that's out on laying in the sand, true? Then you begin to dive beneath that wave, and the deeper you go, the deeper you go, the deeper you go, you enter a space of silence.
All right.
And yoga teaches you how to do that without having to get into the water.
And that, we can all benefit from that, right?
Yes.
And thank you so much for explaining us, the science of yoga today and being here this afternoon. So thank you again, Mrs. Ross, and joining us today on our program. It's wonderful to have you here. And now that we've all had a chance to learn about yoga's fundamental attributes, when we come back, I'd like to invite Catherine to show us a few postures that we can do on our own in our own homes. But first, we head to Lindsay Heights, where we meet Joanna Brooks, owner of Embody Yoga. Joanna was recently featured on the cover of M Magazine in their beauty and wellness issue. With us here for Yoga is for Everybody, Joanna will talk about an applied skill off the mat, diversity in yoga, and why so many Americans are practicing today. Joanna?
I believe that yoga is definitely for everybody. I think yoga, in terms of its benefits, has something to offer everyone. One of the goals of actually practicing the physical practice, the asana, is to literally strengthen the body, build flexibility, all so that we can prepare to sit for meditation, right? And so there's some benefits that come along with doing the physical practice. You start to build strength in certain areas of the body. You notice the muscles becoming more lean and more toned, and you also gain flexibility. But then also, as you get deeper into the practice, you understand that there's something a little bit more special and unique about the practice of yoga, and that it has an impact on your life. And so you start to realize that maybe some of the things that bothered you a lot before don't bother you as much. You're able to let things just kind of roll off of your back and not be so bothered by it. But then I also think that through the practice, we start to learn things about ourselves, right? It makes us more introspective. We turn awareness inwards, and we start to pay attention to how what happens on the mat translates to life in the real world, right? And so I always tell my students, like, if you're in a pose or trying to work up to a pose and you find yourself getting like really frustrated and you give up, or maybe then you push too hard and you hurt yourself, I think that tells you something about how you handle difficult situations off of the mat as well. Are you maybe too forceful, or do you give up too easy? And so it's through actually moving through the physical practice on the mat that we start to self-study and investigate and come to the true purpose and meaning of what yoga is and what it does. I think especially within the United States, right, we like to experience a challenge. And so to be clear, there's a lot of different styles of yoga, but I believe one that is most popular in the United States is Vinyasa Flow, or like a power yoga class that's a little bit more vigorous and it calls for more from the body. Add to that now, a lot of studios and teachers have added in the heat component, and a yoga class can be really challenging and feels like a workout. And now I always say, like, yoga isn't just a workout. There's so much more to it than that. But I think that's what brings a lot of people through the door in the first place. The reason why I started Embody Yoga is because I noticed in a lot of places that I was practicing, not just here in Milwaukee, but other cities, I didn't see a lot of other people of color in those spaces when I would go to practice. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't be unusual for me to be the only person of color in the room. And because I understood the physical, mental, and emotional benefits of the practice, I felt that it was really, really important to be able to share that with all people, but particularly people of color, because I feel that they have something to benefit from the practice. It can be stressful, you know, in the United States, being a person of color and dealing with racism and discrimination. And I believe that yoga can kind of like counteract some of those effects. And so in starting Embody Yoga, not only did I want to share the practice of yoga with people of color, but I wanted them to find a sense of belonging and a sense of community within the practice space. Online, I had read many like blogs and articles about other yogis of color would go into spaces and they would practice and they would be tolerated, but they didn't feel as though they were a part of the community or that they fit in. And so another one of my goals was to be able to create that feeling for my students. And it brings me a lot of joy when they come in and they socialize with each other or with me. I can tell that friendships have been built, that they know the person that's practicing next to them and they feel like they belong here. And that brings me a lot of pride because that was intentional. I wanted them to have that, but then also because I know that even though I haven't been able to experience that necessarily, I've been able to create that for them, and they never, especially if they were just starting yoga with me, they'll never have to experience kind of feeling like out of place or like an outlier or an outsider in a class. I found that most people who are coming to yoga for the first time show up with a lot of nerves because they don't really know what to expect, or they think people might be looking at them or judging them. And so one thing that I want to make really, really clear is that's not the case. Rarely is that ever the case. People who are practicing are so intent on getting whatever is there for them to get that day in their own personal practice that they don't really pay attention to what's going on around them. So I think one thing that you might find that may surprise you is that it's actually very welcoming, and that people aren't as tuned in and observing you as you might think they would be. Now, I'll be honest, depending on the style of yoga, you might find it to be challenging. I think a lot of times people, when they think about yoga, they think about somebody sitting up nice and tall and they're meditating and using mudras and things like that. And again, there are different styles, so that may not necessarily be a component of the class. It may be a more vigorous practice of vinyasa flow or a power flow class. And if you're new, that can be kind of taxing to the body. But again, I find that most students really, really enjoy their first experience. And I think it's the balance between the parts of the practice that are a little bit more heat building and more vigorous, and then eventually towards the end of class, come into a seated position, doing forward folds, and then finally resting in Shavasana. They find that they feel really relaxed. By the end of their practice, they talk about feeling different. And so I think the significance is they notice that something has changed between the moment that they walk through the door and the time the class ends. Something about them has changed. And even if they can't articulate that, they understand that there's been some type of shift in energy or emotions that make them feel that way. And then afterwards, I usually hear that they slept really well that night and felt more calm and had a better day the next day. So I think those are some things that you can look forward to from the practice.
Welcome back, everyone. And at Embody Yoga in Milwaukee, Joanna Brooks guides her students through yoga while creating a diverse community of practitioners. Thanks, Joanna, and keep up the great work. Well, it's time to step on the mat, and Catherine is back with her students, and they will show you and me a few poses. And before we get started here, I think I'm going to try to start with the position of Tadasana, which is the start of everything, and the start of all yoga.
Absolutely, and you always know if you're right or wrong in a posture, because that's always the question.
Right.
Is you come back into your standing Tadasana, and that must be present in every posture that you do.
Of course. All right, well, you're going to have to help me here. So Tadasana, we start with mountain pose.
Yeah, that's some people call it that.
Okay, sure.
All right, now first of all, remember your feet are your foundation. So you want to open up across the toes, toe in slightly, and we're toeing in slightly. So you can lift up from the legs as well as activate the adductors. So those adductors are moving in towards the long bones of the legs as well as the lengthening of the hamstrings and the quadriceps. And you can see automatically you're in an upright position.
All right, and I can feel the opening in the chest and everything, and I think I'm ready to start. But for now, I'm going to let you take over. You guys show us a few poses.
Okay. One of the things that, because I come out primarily out of Iyengar system, I actually work all the time with my students and assist them to always be correct. And as you can see, their posture here in the Tadasana is A1. And then the next position they're going to do is stretch down into Uttasana. And I'm going to give him some assistance by placing the belt here on the hip area. So when he comes down, he's moving directly from the hip, and you notice there's no rounding of the back. The back should be completely smooth, so he can use the eggs and walk out with them slightly. And draw the spine inward. So we always want to keep the spine moving inward and not pushing up and outward, which will assist us into deep breathing. And then from there he can come back up, and everybody can jump back into the Adho Mukha Savasana, which is known as the dog position. Your dog does this all the time, so he could be a very good teacher for you at home if you have a dog. And then once again, I'm going to come up and through here to get an upward rotation on the hip bone, give the full length, come down slightly. So in the quadricep area, I'm going to draw her legs back so her feet come perfectly flat to the floor. And you can take a look at the spine once again. There's no rounding of the back. Okay? All breath arises first in your back body. You've come out of your past. So your breath comes out of your past as well. And from the breathing into the back body, then you take it into the intercostal spaces, or the spaces between your ribs, and then keep inhaling until you draw it completely upward into the front body. So you do a complete yogic breath. You all knew how to do this when you were a child, and we lose that from our sitting and improper standing. And you can see now as Carrie is coming into the runner's position. The runner's posture is especially good for another major muscle system inside of the body, which is known as the psoas muscle. If this psoas muscle shrinks up, you are going to find that it will be a very short period of time and your shoulders start to rotate and come forward. And once the shoulders come forward, then the flexing of the knees. And as you see so many of these elderly people walking down the streets, they're pushing the wheels. That could have been totally and completely prevented just by the practice of yoga. So that's why I'm very excited about yogic work. And those of you who are suffering a lot of anxiety and stress, go back to your breath that you knew as a child. Inhale into the back body, the intercostal spaces, and the front body. Breath is like the current in the water. So if I take deep, slow inhalations and exhalation, that begins to slow that outer wave of the mind down into a stillness. And that's why you practice deep breathing. Now you can do that any place. Sitting at a red light, do some deep breaths. Don't have to do it at a special time. And be aware that whenever you're sitting on your butt bones instead of on your sacrum. Because if you couldn't get into that, the chest is always open. Just keeping my chest open, I will breathe deeper, rounding and sludging, and the rest of it, that inhibits the amount of breath I'm taking in from moment to moment. So, all very important to sustain good health. Then, this is, why don't you, I'm going to have Carrie come into wide angle. Right? And this is another, sometimes we have poles that we do this with. Now watch again as she comes forward. So it really doesn't matter the age. Presses back on her quadriceps and just lengthen her out, push back. And then she can come all the way down to the floor. Very easily. No difficulty. Okay, and now Chris is going to go up into our wonderful cobra position. The common mistake in cobra is people crush the lumbar. Watch as he comes upward here in the pose. Carrie, you want to go in front of him? And maybe turn him around so they can see the back. Yes. Yeah, so they can see your back. Watch his back body. Okay. This is the lumbar region of your spine. These are 5 vertebrae. You do not put body weight into these vertebrae. You can see this creates a nice central arc and not an arch. All right? And then he can slowly come back and down. Goes back up into his dog position. Nice extending upward. And again, you can see, look at the nice indentation in the spine. And then he's going to walk into the Uttasana. And then slowly come all the way back up into his standing Tadasana. Right. So, is there something else you want to do? Okay. Carrie's going to illustrate to you a very easy way of working with your chest. So she's going to go ahead and extend upward. So as Louis pointed out, this is not only about developing flexibility and the rest of it. Anyone can start yoga at any time. It's recommended from our Iyengar, BKSI Iyengar, that we should not consider teaching young children. Children are all natural yogis. Many times, because I've taught at many of the schools, especially on their special days, and that was one of the things I always came to recognize. They were so eager, they began to show me all the postures that they could do. Backward bends, all kinds of extensions, because they have natural limberness and flexibility. We lose that with the aging process, and that's why we have to stay in the practice of yoga. So we do not become stiff, tight, rigid. Instead, we want to maintain our flexibility, and all of us are living longer and longer, and that's why we must stay practicing yoga. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for that. Wow, that's great. I mean, I've been practicing yoga, I think, maybe for just like a few years now, and only here and there, and I really am starting to feel the benefits, and to have a perspective, you know, come and tell everyone, you know, what the benefits are really is always very beneficial. So I want to thank you all again for joining us this afternoon, and I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon and tuning in. Tune in next week as we dive into more great programs and specials with Milwaukee PBS. I'm Luis De Leon. You all have a great rest of your day.